Hello and welcome to Straight Talk, Supply Chain Insights, the podcast for your supply chain leader who is on the go and wants to be in the know. And now, your host, Lora Cecere.
Welcome to Straight Talk with Supply Chain Insights. My name is Lora Cecere, and I love this podcast. It is designed to help people that are on the go but want to be in the know. And recently, I've been working with Heidi Benko, and Heidi works at GT Nexus Infor. I'll let her tell you a little bit about herself, but she's been in the industry and the network solutions for a long time and one of the experts that I look to. So Heidi, introduce yourself. Tell the group a little bit about yourself.
Great. Thank you for having me on today. I appreciate it. So my name is Heidi Benko. I run product marketing and strategy at Infor Nexus, previously GT Nexus, and we are part of Infor. I've been here since it's been, I think, 25 years since the beginning, working for our operating network, everything from product management, product strategy. So I work very closely with our customers in the market and our product teams to make sure we're delivering innovative solutions that meet their needs.
And to me, you're one of the consummate leaders when we talk about product marketing. And unfortunately, a lot of software companies sort of forgotten about the role of product marketing and the design of solutions for the end user. But today we're going to talk about the digital product passport and fascinating legislation that's happening in the EU, which about 30% of manufactured goods are sold in the EU. And by 2027, under the digital product passport, companies have got to comply with the environmental and circularity definitions of the digital product passport. And when I interviewed 20 companies, I found a really low level of awareness, and also they're just not doing the right thing. So I wanted to interview you to get a feel for how you found out about the digital product passport and get some of your perspective. So let's hit it. How did you find out about the digital passport, product passport legislation?
So we were starting to work with our customers more on, we have solutions that help them around their ESG and sustainability needs, and the conversations. It was coming up a lot that they needed help with traceability, and mainly for a number of regulations that were already in place, right? In play for the German Supply Chain Act or the US UFLPA. How do they connect supply chains to get that information? And that's where we started to also learn more about the digital product passport, right? So how are companies getting ready and connecting their supply chain and collecting all that data that they need to meet those requirements? And the other reason they were talking to us is because we are a network that connects their tier one suppliers. And that's part of the process. So, one of our core strengths is connecting companies or supply networks, enabling visibility, collaboration, automation of those processes. And it's another supply chain process. So one less platform. So one of the keywords was platform fatigue. They didn't want one more place for their suppliers to go to. So that's when we started really talking more about it.
And how long ago was that, Heidi?
A couple of years now. I mean, it's early on stages. I think they announced it in 22, right? And a lot of early discussions. Is it really going to take effect in the timelines that they say? Well, they say so.
But what's fascinating to me is that we still don't have clear definition of what the legislation is, and don't expect that to 2025. But yet we're looking at compliance at 2027. And if I look over the many decades I've been in supply chain, I know of no such sweeping legislation that has been completed in this short amount of time. I think about serialization on pharmaceuticals, which took 9 years.
Yeah.
And also in my interviews, I found a lot of confusion between mapping and track and trace. And I wanted to spend a little time with you on those differences, because you've been working in apparel for 15, 20 years on track and trace.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yes, track and trace to an extent, not multi-tier, certainly.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry, go ahead.
But let's talk about the base definitions, because I found that a lot of the sustainability and the procurement leaders were going to a mapping solution, which would tell me kind of a snapshot or a picture.
Yeah.
but doesn't really help me with the dynamics of the supply chain and the bidirectional flow that's really needed in the digital product passport compliance. So let's talk about what's the difference between mapping and multi-tier track and trace in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, mapping is understanding the network, right? Getting it mapped out and knowing, each tier of suppliers that's in your network, right? And that's also key because there are solutions out there that they identify all the tiers. They may not necessarily be in your network, but they're not necessarily, that doesn't mean they're connected and you're actually tracing, right? So some mapping solutions, if you're just using data to build them versus actually kind of inviting and connecting, then you're stuck at mapping. And companies do need that to understand, maybe identify, a multiple tiers up supplier that's in a location, that I'm not allowed to, in my supply chain. That's a problem. I can identify that with mapping, but it won't actually be, now I have to go trace and collect the data that I need for things like digital product passport. And that's where you really need a tracing solution.
And people aren't clear.
Yeah.
We use terms like visibility and track and trace, and they're not clear. And so one of the first things I think we've got to get clear on is these definitions. And what I found very interesting about the research is we're not just tracking the where it's made, but we also have to track the what to comply with circularity. So whether it's percent recycled content or percent reused componentry, it's a very different legislation. I've never seen the legislation of circularity. Your thoughts here?
It's almost staggering. Just the amount of information and data, just even connecting and collecting basic data that supply chains use today almost, and then adding this new layer, right, of the recycled content and all the way back.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
And I found that people weren't aware of the JS1 standards and they were using DUNS numbers. And I'm like, okay, let's stop the craziness. Let's don't map. Let's don't use DUNS numbers. They were looking at tight integration of item and bill of material. And I'm like, this is never going to work with a circular economy. I found we were doing all the wrong things versus, really looking at holistically, starting from the market back and looking at, how do we get multi-tier track and trace on the what and the where. And, it was really fascinating research for me. Were you surprised by the research results at all?
Many things, actually. I mean, I think, one, the standards for sure, like the GS1 standards and the lack of that being in the discussions. I would have thought that was one of the number one things that people were talking about and going to implement, right? Because that's how you enable really detailed traceability and capturing that and the digital link and creating the digital product passport. The other is that 2027 is not far away. And connecting your supply chains and starting to trace and get that is going to take time, and that not very many companies are moving. And even there's regulations out there today that require tracing. So having that system in place and and it has to be digital. It's not something that you could do in the traditional, I'm going to do email and spreadsheets and point-to-point EDI, right? It has to be a digital solution. And then the other thing, like we talked about, it's a supply chain process. Like, how does supply chain go and operationalize all these new processes and data? And that wasn't the discussion in many cases.
No, it wasn't the discussion at all. In fact, I found a lot of the discussion in the policy group or the sustainability group, but not really cross-functional, looking at supply chain, or maybe it was in procurement with the first tier. And there was a real lack of awareness of solutions for multi-tier track and trace. So part of my recommendation is that you can't get to digital product passport compliance without a multi-tier track and trace system, and that I've got to go down the tiers. It's just not level 1 and not level 2, and it's just not a singular item that I'm going to track like cotton. In the case of apparel, I've got to trace notions, and I've got to really be clear on packaging and, the superficial treatment of what I think is going to be, a step change in thinking to move from single use linear flow supply chains to circularity and bidirectional flow in the supply chain to mandate if PU can sell in the EU, I think is something that people really need to stop and think about and embrace as an opportunity for supply chain redesign, because it's not that far away, 2027.
It's not.
But if people wanted to start now to implement a multi-tier track and trace, which you make one of the best ones, and particularly for apparel, you've got just a lot of experience. How long do you think it would take them to implement a really robust solution?
It's such a great question. I mean, we haven't done the multi-tiers yet. I mean, we have some companies doing tracing and stuff and the basics. And I think one of the things we're doing, and traditionally that would take a long time, right? A year plus. But what we've been doing, and particularly you think about all the tiers and how are you going to connect all that data and how are you going to do it quickly? How are you going to get all that data out of the supplier systems? I can't go and have each supplier type stuff in. I can't go and do all those connections. So we're using a lot of AI technology and smart imports to make it easy and get up. So we're seeing that suppliers are onboarding faster and getting it. And now we're using these tools that should compress the cycle time. So I think it's going to be faster. How you get it to the mind-blowing, all the products and all that, I'm actually not sure how long that's going to take, because it's massive, right? It's not just the tier one, I'm managing my supply chain,
And, apparel and batteries are at the top of the list. And so if companies are in apparel, toys, batteries, automotive parts, they really need to step back and think about the difference of mapping versus track and trace, circularity, and follow this legislation. And, I think the GS1 pilots that are working on barcoding at each of the tiers with the information for the digital passport certificate looks really promising. Well, Heidi, thanks for joining the show today. Any last thoughts as we close?
No, thank you for having me. I think people really need to start figuring this out. They need to start working on it and embracing standards. And it's a cross-functional problem, right? And it's a supply chain problem and, multiple, like you said, of these core industries. And we're looking to help our customers in those industries on the journey, because it's education for, I think, all of us. And don't wait.
No, I think we got to get started, even though the legislation's sort of like changing the tire while you're trying to drive. We got to do it, because 2027 isn't that far away. No. Thank you very much, Heidi. Have a good one. I know you're traveling today, so I appreciate your time.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.